Some disappearances leave behind broken doors, abandoned vehicles, or obvious evidence that something terrible happened. Others leave almost nothing. On May 1st, 2016, 29-year-old Bianca Carrasco vanished from San Antonio, Texas, only hours after an argument with her husband. More than a decade later, no confirmed sighting or physical evidence has revealed what truly happened. Cases like Bianca's challenge our understanding of human behavior. Most people do not simply walk away from the lives they spent years creating. Loving mothers rarely disappear without contacting their children, and dedicated professionals seldom abandon their careers overnight. When those expectations suddenly collapse, investigators must examine not only physical evidence, but also psychology, relationships, and silence. Today, we examine one of Texas's most haunting unsolved missing person cases. Throughout this episode, we will separate verified facts from speculation, explore the psychology surrounding Bianca's disappearance, and carefully examine the behavioral patterns often seen when relationships begin to break apart. Before we begin, please like, subscribe, share, and leave your thoughts after watching. To understand why Bianca Carrasco's disappearance still haunts investigators and her family, we must return to San Antonio in the spring of 2016. The city was growing rapidly, with busy hospitals, expanding neighborhoods, and hardworking families. Like many American communities, daily routines created the comforting illusion that tomorrow would be no different from today. Walnut Creek Drive was an ordinary suburban neighborhood where children played outside and neighbors recognized familiar faces. Weekends revolved around family errands, church, and quiet evenings at home. Nothing about the area suggested it would soon become the focus of one of Texas's most enduring missing person investigations, still unresolved after many years. From a psychological perspective, this setting matters. Crimes that occur in peaceful communities often create greater public fear because they challenge our belief that ordinary routines keep us safe. When tragedy grows from an apparently normal home, people begin questioning the security they once found in everyday life and familiar surroundings. Sunday, May 1st, seemed completely ordinary. Families prepared for the coming week, parents organized schedules, and life followed its familiar rhythm. Behind one front door, however, emotional tension had reportedly been building for months. The quiet neighborhood saw only another peaceful evening, unaware that everything was about to change forever. One recurring theme in criminal psychology is the contrast between public appearance and private reality. Families experiencing serious emotional conflict often continue living seemingly normal lives, going to work, raising children, and greeting neighbors with smiles. Only after a crisis occurs do outsiders realize how much pain had remained hidden behind closed doors. At the center of this story was Bianca Carrasco, a 29-year-old oncology nurse and mother of three. Caring for cancer patients required patience, resilience, and compassion. Friends and relatives consistently described Bianca as hardworking, deeply devoted to her children, and someone who naturally placed the needs of others before her own every day. Everyone who knew Bianca described the same woman. She was a loving mother whose children were the center of her life, and she stayed in regular contact with family members. Nothing in her past suggested someone preparing to disappear forever or willingly abandon every meaningful relationship she had spent years building with loved ones. Behavioral analysts begin by asking one essential question. Did the disappearance match the person's normal behavior? Bianca's family believed it did not. They insisted she would never abandon her children without explanation. Although human behavior can change unexpectedly, investigators always compare unexplained disappearances with the victim's long-established habits, priorities, and emotional attachments. Before she disappeared, Bianca appeared to be reaching a major turning point in her life. Friends and relatives said she was considering divorce and hoping to begin again. Such transitions often bring hope, fear, and uncertainty together. People standing at these crossroads may experience enormous emotional pressure without revealing the full extent of their struggles. Her husband, Joe Daniel Carrasco, became an important figure in the investigation because he reportedly was the last person to see Bianca alive. Detectives routinely begin by examining those closest to a missing person. This investigative strategy reflects probability rather than suspicion and should never be interpreted as evidence of criminal guilt. Relatives described Bianca's marriage as increasingly troubled during the months before she disappeared. They said arguments had become more frequent, creating emotional instability inside the home. Domestic conflict alone does not predict violence, but investigators carefully examine escalating relationship problems because they sometimes provide important context when reconstructing unexplained disappearances. Another detail attracted public attention after Bianca disappeared. Daniel was about 11 years older than Bianca and had previously been married to her aunt before later marrying Bianca. Although unusual family histories do not imply criminal conduct, investigators often document these relationships because they may influence loyalty, conflict, emotional dependence, and family communication. Friends said Bianca had begun discussing divorce and looked forward to a different future. Hope can become a powerful psychological force for someone leaving a troubled relationship. Ironically, this hopeful period may also bring greater vulnerability because major life changes often disturb long-established emotional balances and increase tension within a family. From the outside, Bianca's home looked like many others across America. Two parents were raising three children while balancing work and daily responsibilities. Relatives later described ongoing marital conflict, financial disagreements, and controlling behavior behind closed doors. Whether these tensions were connected to her disappearance has never been proven. Isolation is another important concept in behavioral analysis. Family members believed Bianca had gradually become more distant from some relatives during the final years of her marriage. Isolation is not always intentional, but reduced contact can make emotional struggles harder to notice and delay intervention before a personal crisis reaches its breaking point. As evenings settled over Walnut Creek Drive, nothing appeared unusual. The neighborhood remained quiet while families prepared for another work week. Hidden beneath those ordinary routines, however, a series of unseen events was already unfolding. Within hours, Bianca Carrasco would disappear, leaving behind almost no evidence and countless unanswered questions. Sunday, May 1st, 2016, did not begin as the kind of day that would later be dissected by detectives, journalists, and true crime researchers. Like many missing person investigations, the significance of each hour only became apparent in hindsight. At the time, every phone call, every text message, and every ordinary decision seemed insignificant. Only after Bianca Carrasco vanished did investigators begin reconstructing the day minute by minute, searching for the exact moment when an ordinary Sunday transformed into an enduring mystery. Behavioral investigations often rely on what is known as a victimology timeline. Before detectives can understand why someone disappeared, they must understand how that person normally lived. Routine creates predictability, and predictability allows investigators to recognize anomalies. Every confirmed interaction becomes a fixed point, while everything between those points becomes a landscape of unanswered questions. Throughout the day, Bianca reportedly stayed in contact with people close to her, including her sister. Nothing about those conversations suggested she intended to disappear. Friends and relatives later described her as emotionally exhausted, but still hopeful. She appeared focused on building a new future beyond her troubled marriage, not abandoning the life and family she deeply valued. Friends later told investigators that Bianca had been considering divorce and hoped to meet with an attorney soon. Whether that meeting had already been arranged or was still being planned, her intentions appeared clear. She seemed determined to change her life through legal means, making the idea that she voluntarily disappeared seem far less convincing. Another detail soon attracted public attention. Investigators learned that Bianca had recently been communicating with a man outside her marriage. Public information has never established that this relationship was criminal or directly connected to her disappearance. Even so, detectives routinely examine new relationships because they may reveal changing emotions, future plans, or hidden interpersonal conflict. As evening approached, tension reportedly grew inside the Carrasco home. Family members later said Bianca and Daniel argued that night. Domestic arguments alone are not evidence of criminal behavior. However, investigators closely examine conflicts occurring shortly before an unexplained disappearance because they may provide valuable context for understanding a victim's final known hours. One major challenge is that much of the timeline depends on personal accounts rather than independent evidence. Daniel stated that he later left with the couple's youngest child for work and that Bianca walked away from the house afterward. No independent witness has publicly confirmed seeing Bianca leave the neighborhood, leaving investigators with an important unanswered question. In criminal investigations, detectives separate confirmed events from reported events. Confirmed events are supported by evidence such as surveillance footage, phone records, or multiple witnesses. Reported events rely mainly on personal recollection. Neither automatically proves or disproves anything, but understanding this difference helps investigators evaluate timelines without reaching conclusions too quickly. One of the most important digital clues involves Bianca's cell phone. According to investigators, her phone stopped communicating at approximately 10:22 p.m. Family members said this was completely unlike her because she regularly stayed in contact with loved ones. After that evening, the device never became active again, adding another mystery to the investigation. Modern investigations rely heavily on digital behavior. Smartphones quietly record communication, movement, financial activity, and daily routines, often becoming silent witnesses after someone disappears. When a person's digital presence suddenly ends without explanation, investigators treat that interruption seriously because it may indicate an unexpected event, even when the exact cause remains unknown. What happened after that night was just as disturbing as what happened before it. Bianca never returned for her clothes or personal belongings. She never accessed her bank accounts, used her credit cards, or contacted relatives and friends. Almost every normal responsibility that had defined her daily life appeared to stop at exactly the same time. Behavioral analysts call this a total pattern interruption. Adults who intentionally disappear usually leave signs of preparation, such as withdrawing money, arranging transportation, finding shelter, or contacting trusted people. Bianca did none of these. Vanishing without any documented activity for years is highly unusual, especially for a devoted mother with stable employment and close family ties. Perhaps the most disturbing part of Bianca's timeline is what cannot be confirmed. No neighbor publicly reported seeing her leave. No surveillance camera captured her walking away. No passing driver came forward with a verified sighting. If she truly left the house on foot, investigators have never identified independent evidence showing where she went afterward. The first warning signs appeared quietly rather than dramatically. Bianca failed to appear where people expected her, and loved ones initially assumed she needed time after an emotional weekend. As hours turned into another day, concern replaced reassurance. Repeated silence gradually convinced her family that something far more serious had likely happened. Concern grew even stronger when Bianca failed to report for work. Dedicated healthcare professionals rarely leave demanding jobs without notice, and coworkers quickly recognized her absence. At the same time, family members repeatedly called her cell phone but received no response. Every unanswered call reinforced the belief that Bianca's silence was completely out of character. Bianca's sister, Giovanna Burney, quickly became one of the strongest voices searching for answers. Families often recognize unusual behavior long before investigators because they understand the victim's routines, emotions, and relationships. From the very beginning, Bianca's relatives insisted she would never disappear voluntarily and urged authorities to treat the case as deeply suspicious. Police soon opened a missing person investigation. Detectives interviewed family members, examined available evidence, and worked to reconstruct Bianca's final known movements. Yet they faced a difficult reality. There was no confirmed crime scene, no body, and almost no physical evidence explaining what happened after the last reported sighting. Throughout the investigation, Daniel maintained that Bianca left after their argument. Investigative records also indicated that Bianca had allegedly discovered unauthorized activity involving her cell phone and bank account before disappearing. These reported circumstances raised additional questions about trust and financial control. Even so, authorities have never announced evidence sufficient to charge anyone in connection with her disappearance. Then came the detail that continues to haunt investigators. Bianca's cell phone has never been recovered. Her bank accounts remained untouched, and her credit cards were never used again. No surveillance footage confirmed that she left the neighborhood. More than a decade later, the mystery endures because so many expected pieces of evidence simply do not exist. When investigators face a disappearance with almost no physical evidence, they must eliminate possibilities instead of proving a single theory. Bianca Carrasco's case quickly entered that difficult territory. Detectives were investigating neither a confirmed homicide nor an ordinary missing person case, but an uncertain mystery where every unanswered question carried equal importance. From the beginning, investigators grew increasingly concerned that Bianca's disappearance might involve criminal activity. That concern came not from a crime scene, but from the circumstances themselves. A devoted mother of three with stable employment and close family ties vanished without taking money, contacting loved ones, or offering any believable explanation for leaving. Search efforts expanded throughout the San Antonio area. Officers searched possible locations, followed public tips, and tried to identify anyone who might have seen Bianca after May 1st. Like many long-term missing person investigations, numerous leads initially seemed promising but produced no verifiable answers. Each unsuccessful search reduced possibilities while making the mystery even deeper. One of the greatest frustrations for investigators was the absence of a clearly defined crime scene. In homicide investigations, forensic evidence often establishes where an event occurred. In Bianca's case, detectives first had to determine whether a crime had even taken place, and, if so, where it might have happened. Without that foundation, every search became broader, more resource-intensive, and increasingly dependent on witness statements and digital reconstruction. This illustrates one of the most difficult realities in criminal investigation. Evidence rarely exists in isolation. DNA, fingerprints, surveillance footage, and witness testimony become powerful only when connected through a coherent timeline. When several of those elements are missing, investigators must rely on probability, behavioral analysis, and careful comparison between known facts and competing explanations. It is a methodical process that often takes years rather than weeks. As the months passed, local media gave Bianca's disappearance increasing attention. Television stations across Texas shared updates, family appeals, and police statements. Publicity became both helpful and challenging. Greater visibility encouraged new tips from the public, but it also fueled speculation from people who had little understanding of the actual evidence. Bianca's family appeared in interview after interview, asking people not to forget her. Their message never changed. They believed Bianca would never willingly leave her children behind. Each passing anniversary became another painful reminder that three children were growing up without knowing what had happened to their mother. Social media added another layer of complexity. Thousands of strangers began discussing Bianca's disappearance, creating countless theories online. Some relied on publicly available facts, while others made unsupported claims. Public attention can keep cold cases alive, but speculation without evidence often complicates investigations and places additional pressure on grieving families. Throughout the investigation, law enforcement emphasized one important fact. Although detectives examined several possibilities and interviewed multiple individuals, no one had been formally charged in Bianca's disappearance. That distinction matters. Criminal investigations rely on evidence, not public opinion, and responsible analysis must always separate investigative interest from legal responsibility. Because Daniel Carrasco reportedly gave the final known account of seeing Bianca, investigators carefully examined his statements. This was standard investigative procedure, not evidence of guilt. Detectives routinely begin by evaluating those closest to a missing person, comparing their accounts with independent evidence to determine whether the timeline remains consistent. Investigators compared witness statements with cell phone records, financial activity, communication history, and known movements. This process is known as behavioral consistency analysis. Rather than judging appearances, detectives examine whether documented evidence supports a person's account. Minor inconsistencies are common, but significant unexplained differences may identify important areas requiring further investigation. Public discussion often focused on possible motives. Many questioned whether marital conflict, divorce, financial pressure, or child custody disputes played a role. While such issues commonly appear in domestic investigations, motive alone never proves criminal behavior. Investigators must support every theory with reliable evidence, rather than assumptions or public speculation. Another important focus involved Bianca's plans for the future. Friends said she intended to leave her marriage and begin a different life. They also reported she had started a new relationship. Psychologically, people preparing for positive change usually make plans and invest emotionally in the future, making voluntary disappearance seem less consistent. Family members repeatedly said Bianca was excited about rebuilding her life and wanted custody of her children. They believed she would never willingly leave them behind. Although investigators cannot rely only on emotional testimony, consistent descriptions from multiple relatives and friends helped establish an important behavioral profile for understanding her disappearance. Years passed, but the investigation never officially ended. Real criminal cases rarely conclude with dramatic discoveries. Instead, detectives quietly revisit evidence, re-examine witness statements, and apply newer forensic methods unavailable during the original investigation. Cold cases are not forgotten. Sometimes they simply wait for one missing fact that connects everything. Crime Stoppers, missing person organizations, and Bianca's family never stopped searching for answers. Through reward programs, interviews, awareness campaigns, anniversaries, and community events, they continued urging the public to come forward. Investigators understand that memories change, relationships evolve, and silence can eventually break. Sometimes the smallest forgotten detail shared years later becomes the key to unlocking an unsolved case. Today, Bianca Carrasco remains missing. Years of investigation, public appeals, advancing forensic technology, and community support have still not produced a definitive answer. Detectives have reconstructed timelines and examined competing theories, but certainty remains out of reach. Sometimes the greatest mystery is created not by complicated evidence, but by the single crucial fact that has never been found. After years of investigation, repeated searches, public appeals, and countless interviews, Bianca Carrasco's disappearance remains an active missing person case without a definitive answer. There has been no confession, no courtroom resolution, and no evidence capable of explaining her final moments. What remains are two competing theories that require careful analysis rather than emotional speculation. The first and most widely discussed theory is that Bianca became the victim of foul play sometime after the reported argument at her home. This theory is not based on a single dramatic discovery. Instead, it grows from the cumulative weight of behavioral inconsistencies. Bianca disappeared without contacting her children, never accessed her financial accounts again, never returned to collect personal belongings, and never resumed the ordinary routines that had defined her daily life. Behavioral analysts closely examine what psychologists call future-oriented behavior. Before disappearing, Bianca reportedly planned major life changes, including divorce and a fresh start. Friends said she spoke about legal options and a hopeful future. People actively building new plans rarely abandon them without leaving behind some evidence explaining such a sudden and permanent change. Another important factor is the sudden end of Bianca's digital activity. Today, our phones quietly record where we go, who we contact, and how we live. When that digital trail stops completely, investigators naturally question whether the silence reflects a voluntary decision or an unexpected event. In Bianca's case, no definitive answer has emerged. Supporters of the foul play theory also point to everything that never happened afterward. Bianca made no confirmed financial transactions, returned to no workplace, contacted no family members, and produced no verified sightings. Individually, these facts prove nothing. Together, however, they form a behavioral pattern that many investigators find difficult to explain as voluntary disappearance. Even so, responsible analysis requires accepting uncertainty. No publicly available forensic evidence has identified where a crime may have occurred, and no physical evidence has explained Bianca's disappearance. Most importantly, no court has found any individual criminally responsible. Respecting that distinction protects both the integrity of the investigation and the principle of due process. The second theory receives less public attention but remains impossible to dismiss completely. According to this possibility, Bianca may indeed have left her residence and later encountered an unrelated individual or an unforeseen event. Stranger-perpetrated crimes, while statistically less common than violence involving someone known to the victim, do occur. Investigators therefore cannot eliminate this explanation solely because it appears less emotionally compelling. This alternative theory also faces significant challenges. No confirmed witness has publicly reported seeing Bianca after she supposedly left home, and no surveillance footage has documented her movements. Without independent evidence showing where she traveled, investigators cannot verify whether she encountered another person. As a result, the theory remains possible but unsupported by direct evidence. Experienced investigators often compare competing theories by asking which requires the fewest assumptions. Every unanswered question must eventually be filled by either evidence or speculation. In Bianca's case, both leading theories leave important gaps. One struggles to explain her disappearance at home, while the other cannot explain her complete disappearance afterward. Perhaps the most heartbreaking question remains the simplest one. If Bianca voluntarily started a new life, why has she never contacted her 3 children? Although human behavior is unpredictable, parents rarely remain separated from deeply loved children for years without any confirmed communication. That reality continues influencing both investigators and the public's understanding of this case. Another question remains equally important. If someone knows exactly what happened to Bianca, where is the missing evidence investigators have searched for over so many years? Many cold cases are solved because one witness finally speaks or one forgotten piece of digital evidence is discovered. History repeatedly shows that silence rarely lasts forever. From the perspective of criminal psychology, Bianca's case highlights several important behavioral patterns. Investigators examine relationship dynamics, emotional changes, financial activity, digital communication, and actions taken after the disappearance. None of these factors alone proves guilt. Together, however, they help identify unanswered questions while reducing the risk of relying on unsupported assumptions. Victim psychology deserves just as much attention as the investigation itself. Friends, relatives, and coworkers consistently describe Bianca as a devoted mother with strong emotional bonds to her children and family. While this does not rule out voluntary disappearance, it establishes an important behavioral baseline that investigators compare against everything that happened after she vanished. Future advances in forensic technology may eventually provide new answers. Modern investigations increasingly rely on improved cell phone analysis, digital data recovery, geographic reconstruction, and renewed witness interviews. Many cold cases have been solved years later because evidence that once seemed insignificant became meaningful when examined with more advanced investigative techniques. Beyond the investigation lies a broader human lesson. From an Eastern perspective, every action leaves consequences, even if justice is delayed. Truth may remain hidden for years, but silence rarely lasts forever. Families continue remembering, communities continue searching, and time sometimes reveals what once appeared permanently lost beneath uncertainty. A Western perspective offers another lesson. Bianca's disappearance reminds us that danger does not always come from strangers or unfamiliar places. Sometimes it develops inside ordinary relationships, shaped by emotional conflict, stress, and unseen fractures. The case also highlights the limits of criminal investigations when evidence is scarce and certainty remains beyond reach. More than a decade has passed since Bianca Carrasco was last seen. Her children have grown up carrying questions no family should face. Her loved ones continue searching for answers, hoping one forgotten memory or overlooked detail will finally explain what happened. Until then, Bianca's case remains an enduring symbol of unresolved loss. As we conclude this case, one truth remains unchanged. No one knows exactly what happened to Bianca Carrasco. We can study behavior, examine evidence, and compare competing theories, but responsible investigation must never confuse suspicion with proof. Sometimes the greatest respect we can show is continuing to seek the truth while accepting uncertainty. Some crimes leave no screams, only questions, and some silences echo louder than any confession. Thank you for listening to Criminal Mindcast.